I still remember that night as if it were painted on the inside of my eyelids. The wind was howling outside the hospital, scraping against the metal windows like it was trying to warn me. It was past midnight, and the fluorescent lights flickered the way they do when a storm brews. I was on the night shift, something I'd sworn I'd never do again after retirement. But the hospital near White Sands always needed help, and I could never say no when someone called me Nurse Carter with that pleading tone. That night started like any other. Coffee gone cold, the steady rhythm of machines, and the hum of silence that only hospitals know. I had 2 patients under observation, both stable. Then, around 1:17 a.m., the front doors opened with a gust of cold desert air. 2 men entered, both wearing black suits, dark glasses, at night, and government badges that looked too clean to be real. "Mrs. Carter?" one of them asked. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "Yes," I said. "We need your help. Now." They didn't wait for my answer. One of them motioned for me to follow as they rolled in a covered stretcher. Whatever was underneath it wasn't human. I could tell by the way the sheet rose unevenly, the strange angles beneath it. I froze. "What is this?" I whispered. The taller man turned to me. "You'll be briefed later. Right now, you just need to keep it alive." Those words still echo in my mind. Keep it alive. They guided the stretcher into an isolated room at the end of the hallway. The smell that filled the air wasn't blood or disinfectant. It was metallic, almost electric. When they pulled back the sheet, my breath caught in my throat. I had seen many things in my years as a nurse: burned soldiers, accident victims, even a man struck by lightning, but never something like that. The being on the stretcher had a small, fragile body, almost translucent skin that shimmered under the surgical light, and large eyes that reflected every movement in the room. It was breathing, but barely. "Vitals dropping," I murmured automatically, though I wasn't sure if its heartbeat even worked like ours. "Do what you have to do," one of the agents said. Then both of them left the room, locking the door behind them. For a few seconds, I just stood there. Me, a retired nurse from New Mexico, alone in a locked room with whatever this was. I wanted to believe it was some kind of experimental subject, maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew. Instinct took over. I checked for trauma, small circular burns along its chest, like radiation exposure. Its pulse, if you could call it that, vibrated softly through the skin, faster than any human's. I placed an oxygen mask over its mouth, or what looked like one, and adjusted the IV lines. When my hand brushed against its arm, I felt warmth. Not body heat, but energy, like a low hum traveling through my fingertips. For a second, the lights flickered again. The monitor beeped irregularly, then steadied. I don't know why, but I whispered, "You're going to be okay." Then something impossible happened. It opened its eyes. They weren't black, like in the movies. They were deep silver, almost liquid. The pupils expanded and contracted, focusing directly on me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I'd faint. But instead of fear, I felt calm. The being looked at me with what I can only describe as sorrow. Pure, heavy sorrow, as if it had seen every tragedy of the world and carried them all at once. It tried to speak. A weak, vibrating sound filled the room, like several voices at once. I couldn't understand the words, but the feeling was unmistakable. Gratitude. I worked in silence for hours. I cleaned the burns, stabilized its breathing, gave fluids, monitored everything. Every time I thought it would slip away, it seemed to fight back. It wanted to live. Around 4 a.m., I noticed something strange. The wounds were closing, not just healing, but reforming, as if the tissue remembered how it was supposed to be. I leaned closer, stunned. That's when I heard the sound again, this time, clear and direct, inside my head. "Do not be afraid." I froze. The being hadn't moved its mouth. The voice was gentle, echoing from somewhere behind my thoughts. My knees went weak. That was the moment I realized my life, my faith, my understanding of the world, would never be the same again. I didn't sleep the next day. I couldn't. I drove home with trembling hands, stared at the stucco wall above my kitchen sink, and tried to make ordinary things, coffee, toast, the ticking clock, convince me that the night had been ordinary too. It didn't work. By late afternoon, a black sedan idled across the street from my house like a punctuation mark I didn't know how to read. At 7:42 p.m., my phone rang. "Mrs. Carter," a male voice said, crisp and hollow. "We'll need you again tonight." "No, please, no explanation." I said yes anyway. When I arrived, the hospital felt staged, like a familiar set rebuilt from memory. The night supervisor was on break. The security guard I'd known for years avoided my eyes. The two men in suits waited by the elevator. One handed me a visitor badge with no photo and a timestamp that looked fake. "Your patient is stable," the taller one said. "You'll continue supportive care. Record nothing. Speak to no one." "What is it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I can't treat what I don't understand." "Treat it like you do," he replied. "You're here because you don't panic." I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because the elevator doors opened and I smelled that same metallic charge in the air. The isolation room had been altered. Blackout curtains sealed the glass. The overhead lights dimmed to an amber low, and a second IV pole stood ready with clear fluids labeled in codes I'd never seen. It lay there, smaller than I remembered. Eyes closed, skin faintly luminescent under the monitor glow. The readings were not human, no systolic or diastolic, just a flowing waveform, as if a tide rose and fell within it. I checked lines, replaced a bag, adjusted the oxygen cannula to the position that had steadied its breathing the night before, and then, without so much as a twitch of its mouth, I heard it again. Inside me, behind the old scar tissue of every grief I'd ever stitched shut. Evelyn. My name as gentle as a hand on a fevered brow. I flinched and turned to the door, half expecting the agents to be right behind me. No one was there. "I don't know how you're doing that," I whispered, "but you need to rest." My own voice sounded like a stranger's. It didn't open its eyes. The sound, I don't know what else to call it, shifted into something like thought, and breath braided together. Images came with it. A cold sky scattered with impossible stars. Sand that wasn't sand, rushing like light. A sense of distance that wasn't measured in miles. None of it had edges, yet I understood the intention the way I understand pain without seeing the wound. "Not harm," it said. No, felt. "Not prisoner. Lost." "Lost," I repeated, wiping along the burn marks with warm saline, as if the word itself could soothe. "Were you in a crash?" A pause, then a ripple of regret that was almost maternal in its tenderness. "Fell," it answered. "Fell through." I thought of storms that drop people out of the sky, of pilots who misjudge a horizon, of meteors that never learn the rules of our air. I thought, too, of how many times I'd seen human beings fall through. Addiction, grief, diagnoses that arrive like thieves at 3 a.m. Not alien at all, that part. "Why me?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Why speak to me?" A new image. 2 small hands, mine, decades ago, pressing a cool cloth to my father's forehead. He'd been sick then, lungs like paper sacks, and I'd promised the ceiling I'd be a nurse when I grew up. The promise tasted like peppermint and dust. I hadn't thought of that day in years. I hadn't told anyone. "Because you keep," it said, and the word unfurled inside me like a patience chart written in light. "You keep what matters alive." I blinked hard. Professional Evelyn. Stay professional. I anchored myself in tasks. Changed tubing, checked the monitor, palpated gently where the burns had been. The skin beneath my fingertips felt warmer, renewed, not healed, nothing that easy, but reorganizing, the way a choir finds its pitch after the first unsure note. The door cracked open. The shorter agent stepped in, eyes scanning the room without really seeing anything. "Vitals?" "Stable," I said, "and improving." He nodded once, the way men nod at weather reports. "We'll have additional samples collected at 200. "Samples of what?" I asked. "There's significant stress reaction when—" "Do what you can to keep it calm," he said, and left. The lock clicked. I swallowed the impulse to chase him down the hallway and demand a name, a file, a reason. The being's eyes opened, silver, lucid, reflecting the half-light. I saw my own outline in them, small and wavering. They will take, it conveyed. You will give, but you choose how. I understood with alarming clarity. I couldn't stop whatever collection meant, but I could control the space between procedures, the breath between, the tone of the room, the human kindness that medicine sometimes forgets to prescribe. So I worked the way I used to with frightened children and combative veterans. I narrated gently before each touch, asked permission even when no one expected me to, kept my hands steady and my voice low. I hummed a hymn my mother loved, not because of the words, but because the melody knew where to go without me. As I did, the waveform on the monitor smoothed, lengthened, settled. "Thank you," it said, not in English or any language, but in that deep, luminous way that made tears sting the corners of my eyes. "You remember?" What do I remember? It gazed past me as if listening to a choir I couldn't hear. How to open the door. A shiver moved up my spine, slow and precise. I wanted to ask what door, to where, to whom. But footsteps approached, rolling a cart that rattled with instruments I didn't recognize. Time, I realized, was narrowing to a thin, bright thread, and I was walking it without a net. I tucked the blanket closer around its shoulders, a human gesture in an inhuman night. "I'll be here," I said. It answered like a promise kept long ago. I know. I've always believed in small, steady things. Sterile gauze folded to the same size, a saline flush timed to a heartbeat, a hand resting on a shoulder until the shaking stops. That's how I approached the third night, like the universe could be convinced by routine to behave. The agents wheeled in another cart at 1:58 a.m. Sealed specimen tubes, a handheld scanner that hummed like a trapped hornet, and a tray of labeled swabs that looked like tongue depressors for a different anatomy. The shorter agent gave me a look I'd seen in field hospitals, polite, distant, non-negotiable. "We'll need baseline readings before we proceed," he said. "Then you wait until it's calm," I replied. "Agitated subjects corrupt baselines." It was the kind of sentence that sounds technical enough to pass. He hesitated, then nodded once. I had bought us minutes. Sometimes minutes are everything. I drew the curtain tighter, lowered the lights, and pulled my stool to the bedside. "It's Evelyn," I whispered, "the way you introduce yourself to a frightened child. I need to check you again." Its eyes opened, silver, lucid. I explained each step like a prayer. Warm saline, gentle pressure, nothing sharp. My hands remembered years of burn care. Rinse, pat dry, dress lightly. But under my fingers, the tissue did something I don't have a word for. It didn't just heal, it reorganized. The edges of the burns softened and braided themselves inward, like a zipper closing in slow motion. I felt the change as a vibration through my fingertips, a quiet chord settling into tune. The monitor offered no human numbers, just that tidal waveform, rising and resting. I synchronized my breath to it. Inhale on the swell, exhale on the fall. The room answered. Even the machines seemed to listen. "Pain?" I asked without thinking. A ripple of cool air moved through me, an answer without language. "Diminishing, because you remember." Remember what? "The order of kindness," it conveyed, as if reciting something older than medicine. The phrase lodged itself under my breastbone. I prepared an IV change, and for the first time since the first night, I saw it wince. Subtle, a shallow catch in the waveform. "I'm here," I said. "I'll be gentle." I placed my palm near its shoulder, not touching, just present. The wave steadied. The line slid in. I taped it down with careful corners. It looked almost ordinary, the way a miracle sometimes hides inside a routine. The door clicked. The agents returned with the technician. White coat, blank face, hands too busy to be kind. "We're ready for samples," he said. I positioned myself between the cart and the bed, not obstructing, not yielding. "I'll narrate," I told him. "It helps reduce stress response." He shrugged. "Whatever." I spoke softly as he swabbed near the healed areas. Cool touch, brief pressure, no harm intended. And I felt the being answer in that inner way, a note like gratitude rippling through my ribs. The tech moved to the scanner, the hum deepened, and the air smelled suddenly metallic, like rain on a railroad. The waveform fluttered. I looked at the agent. "Lower the output," I said. "You're spiking the response." "We need signal," the tech muttered. "You'll get noise if you push it," I said, and I let years of authority coat my voice. 5% down. He rolled his eyes, made a show of adjusting, and the hum softened, just enough. The waveform smoothed again. They took what they came for and left as quickly as they'd arrived, a rattling wheel, the last sound through the hall. When the lock clicked, the room exhaled. So did I. "You protected," the being conveyed. "I stalled," I said, surprised at the heat in my voice. "It's not much." "Choice is much," it answered. "Small doors open great rooms." I cleaned the last of the old dressings, and that's when I noticed it. A faint glow along the edge of the gauze I'd removed. A soft, pearly luminescence that clung to the cotton like dew. I cupped it in my palm. The light didn't brighten the room. It softened it, as if asking the shadows to be kinder. I slid the gauze into a sterile bag and sealed it. Proof, I thought before I had the right to think it. Or maybe not proof. Companion to memory. "It's changing fast," I whispered. "Faster than we do." "Your species changes in storms," it replied. "Mine in songs. You are learning both." A pressure gathered behind my eyes. Not sadness exactly, not relief. Something in between. The way the air feels just before dawn lets go of the night. I pulled my stool closer, elbows on my knees, and asked the question that had lived in my throat since the first word I'd heard inside my head. "What are you?" The room went very quiet. No beeps, no hums, only the distant breath of the ventilation. When the answer came, it didn't come as a definition. It came as a sequence of images and feelings that unfurled in me like a long, stitched scar finally softening. A sky older than our calendars. A fall that wasn't a sin so much as a separation. A long journey measured not by miles but by mercy received and returned. And threaded through it all, one idea, clear as a held hand. We are what we choose when we are afraid. I sat with that until my bones believed it. I checked lines again, more out of habit than need. The burns were nearly gone. The waveform had become a slow, graceful tide. The room felt awake. "Will you live?" I asked, surprised by the tremor in my voice. "Because you remembered," it answered. "Yes." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear fell onto my wrist. I wiped it away, embarrassed by my own humanity in front of a being that had just taught me how to adjust a machine with a hymn. I almost laughed. The hallway stirred. Voices, wheels, a schedule resuming its march. I leaned close, the way I used to in ICUs when families asked me, "Will she make it through the night?" "I'll be back," I said. "You never left," it replied. Then closed its eyes, not in weakness, but in rest, like someone who finally trusts the dark to keep watch. That was the night I stopped believing I was just healing a patient. Something else was knitting itself together, not just tissue, but meaning. And I had the strange, unshakable feeling that the next time it spoke of doors, one of them would open. I arrived early the fourth night, long before the suits could turn the room into a laboratory. I told the front desk I was there to check inventory, then slipped down the service corridor with my badge against my chest like a borrowed name. The air tasted like dust and disinfectant, and a secret I was tired of keeping alone. The isolation room was dim, the amber light pooling softly over the bed. He, I had started to think, was awake. The skin that once looked like fragile glass now held a quiet strength, the burns reduced to pale shadows. The waveform on the monitor pulsed like a tide I could have timed my breath to in my sleep. "Good evening," I whispered, closing the door with the gentleness of a prayer. "It's just us." I didn't hear a voice this time. I felt a welcome, warm, unhurried, The way a hand reaches for yours in the dark and doesn't fumble. I washed my hands because ritual matters, then moved to the bedside. "How are you?" I asked, and realized I meant it the way a daughter asks an aging mother, part medical, part plea. "Aligned," came the answer inside me like a chord settling. "The storm has passed." I exhaled. Good. Because I have questions, and for once the hallway is quiet. He blinked, slow, deliberate. Silver eyes reflecting the small woman I am and the larger thing I was trying to be. "What are you really?" I asked. "I don't mean species or origin. I mean, your place in all of this. In us." I braced for metaphors I wouldn't grasp or star maps that would leave me lost. Instead, I received a memory that wasn't mine. A field of light, not blinding but generous, and forms moving within it like thoughts taking shape. There was no up or down, just nearness and distance measured in trust. From that brightness, something like a filament thinned and thinned until it drifted, separate. Not expelled, not cursed. Separate. And with that separation came a kind of hunger. "We turned away from listening," he conveyed, and I felt the ache of it like missing my father's laugh. Not hatred, not war, noise. We made our own wind and forgot the quiet it had been born from. "Fallen," I said, tasting the word and finding it softer than I'd expected. Not pushed, drifted. Yes. I watched my own hands smooth the blanket the way I used to in hospice when words were too heavy to carry alone. "Why come here?" "We did not come to conquer," he said. Not in sentences, but in small, patient understandings. "We came to remember what listening feels like in a world that forgets." I almost laughed because how many times had I told young nurses that listening stabilizes vital signs more than any drug? I looked at the door. "They'll be back soon, with their machines." "They are songs too," he answered, and I knew he didn't mean it as flattery. "But not the only ones." I pulled a chair closer and sat. "You said something the second night," I reminded him. "About a door, that I remembered how to open it." "What door?" He did not look at the walls or the ceiling or the blacked-out window. He looked at me. A rise in the waveform, then a settling, like he was timing his answer to my breath. "The door between fear and attention," he conveyed. "You open it each time you choose to stay." I wanted to argue that staying is just stubbornness with better manners, but I knew what he meant. There's a second in every crisis when your body wants to run. Stay through that second, and medicine begins. Stay through 10, and mercy does. "Evelyn," he went on, and my name warmed the room. "You asked last night if I will live. You did not ask if you will." I blinked. "I'm 54, I said. "I've lived plenty." He held my gaze, not accusing, not even curious, simply present. My mouth moved before I decided it should. My faith got small, I confessed, surprised at my own voice. Not gone, just folded and put in a drawer. I open it on Sundays and funerals. I'm not proud of that. He offered no comfort, only attention, the hardest mercy, the one that asks nothing and changes everything. "Tell me about him," I said finally, the words tiny and enormous at once. "About Jesus." The name felt both familiar and fragile in a room like this. The lights didn't flicker. No trumpets sounded. What came was simple. A carpenter's hand sanding a rough edge, dust and sunlight, a bowl of water, quiet laughter at a table where the poor were not ashamed to eat. Then grief. A grief so wide I thought I'd drown in it, and through it, a thread of love that didn't break. The thread moved across years, across languages, across wars and deserts and hospital rooms. It did not hurry. It did not tire. "Return?" I asked, barely breathing. "Not a date," he conveyed, and a tenderness like moonlight filled the space between us. "A room. When enough hearts choose the door you already open, the room will be full. He will be recognized there, because he never left." I pressed my fist to my mouth. No prophecy, no calendar. Just a terrifying instruction. Keep opening the door. Footsteps approached, wheels rattling, voices clipped. The spell, or whatever it was, didn't break. It widened to include time's intrusion. He reached, not with his hand, but with that interior nearness I was learning to meet. "You will be asked for proof," he said. "Give them care. Keep the rest." "Keep what?" I whispered. "The room," he answered. The lock turned. The suits entered with their instruments and a temperature that could curdle cream. I rose, squared my shoulders, and did what nurses do. I narrated, I protected, I bought minutes where I could. But underneath the task and the hum and the sterile glare, something had already changed. There was a door in me now, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to leave it open. Morning came like a verdict. I had slept for an hour, maybe 2, the kind of sleep that doesn't rest you so much as hide you. When I pulled into the hospital lot, the sky was a flat pewter, the kind that makes you think the sun forgot its job. The security booth was manned by a guard I didn't recognize. He looked at my badge longer than necessary, then waved me through with a smile that didn't travel to his eyes. Inside, things were wrong where they should have been ordinary. The coffee machine had been moved 3 inches to the left. The corkboard held new flyers with yesterday's date. My name was missing from the whiteboard where night assignments are scribbled and smudged into surrender. It was like walking into your childhood home after strangers had rented it. The service corridor smelled of lemon cleaner, and a decision no one asked me to make. I reached the isolation room, its blackout curtains gone, the door propped open with a plastic wedge. The bed was stripped, the monitor unplugged. The amber bulb I'd come to rely on lay in the trash like a plucked moon. I stood in the doorway and felt time split. In one slice, I saw the room as it was, blank, bored, done. In the other, I saw the bed-lit silver eyes, the tidal waveform, the way the air had seemed to listen. I couldn't make them overlap. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's the violent erasure of the space where life had just begun to make sense. I checked the cabinet where I kept supplies. The drawers opened smoothly, too smoothly. The sterile bags I'd sealed were gone. The small swabs, the extra cannula, even my favorite roll of tape, the one with the slightly serrated edge, replaced with stock that didn't remember me. I opened the locked narcotics box, not because I expected to find him there, but because I needed to open something no one else had opened yet. Empty, accounted for. Of course. I went to the nurse's station, palms flat, the way you put hands on a table when you're bargaining with yourself. "Where's the patient from room 19? I asked the day nurse, a woman I'd trained 10 years ago, whose wedding I'd attended, whose mother I'd sat with in pre-op. She blinked at me like the question had arrived in a language neither of us spoke. "There isn't a room 19, she said gently, as if correcting a child. "We renumbered that wing last winter." My throat did the small, helpless click it does when a wave hits faster than your breath. I looked past her at the laminated map on the wall. The wing was there. The rooms were numbered differently, but the space existed. "Who authorized the change?" I managed. "Administration, I guess." She smiled. "You okay, Evelyn?" I could have lied. I could have said I was fine, that I'd mixed up nights. Instead, I said, "If anyone asks, I'll be in the basement records room." The basement felt like a truth you keep under the house. Cool, humming, honest about what it stores. I logged into the system. My credentials worked because bureaucracy isn't as quick as it thinks it is. I searched for last night's electronic charting. No results. I widened the range. Last 3 nights. No matches. I searched my own keystrokes, the minor typos my fingers make when they outrun my mind. Nothing. I dug into the access logs. A maintenance blackout had been scheduled from 0200 to 0500, perfectly covering the hours that mattered. I checked camera archives. The corridor feed showed a time-lapse repair loop. Mop bucket, ladder, empty hall, no agents, no carts, no me. Either I had dreamed a 4-night shift in high definition, or someone had wrapped the truth in a bandage and pulled it away clean. The elevator ride back up felt longer than any I'd taken, as if the cables were moving through syrup. When the doors opened, I was ready to drive home and sit very still until my life shrank back to a size I could dust. Instead, I took a right turn my body made on its own and walked to the chapel. I hadn't been there in months. The little room was dark except for a red sanctuary lamp that held its small, stubborn flame. I sat in the back pew and let my bones be heavier than my skin. I didn't pray, at least not with words. I just let the silence hold me the way a good nurse holds a story she has no right to tell. A memory arrived like a hand slipping into mine. You will be asked for proof. Give them care. Keep the rest. Proof. My mind reached for the one thread I still had. The sterile bag I'd sealed 2 nights before. The one I'd slipped, not into the cabinet, but into my own pocket. Then my car's glove compartment. Then the old cedar box on my bedroom dresser, under a stack of mass cards and the dried corsage from my daughter's prom. I had tucked it away before I knew I'd need it, because I keep what matters alive. I stood so quickly the pew groaned. On my way out, I passed the shorter agent in the hall, in civilian clothes now, the kind of face you forget on purpose. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice neutral. "We appreciate your service." I stopped. It was an absurd choice and an honest one. "Where is he?" I asked. "Who?" His eyebrows were patient. "The patient I kept alive," I said. "The one you erased." A pause. He glanced at the chapel door behind me, then at my hands, as if they held something he'd lost. "You did your job," he said. "Now do yourself a favor and forget." I smiled without humor. Forgetting isn't one of my competencies. That night at home, after triple locking the door and closing the curtains I rarely bothered with, I took the cedar box down and set it on the kitchen table. My hands shook, not from fear exactly, but from the anticipation of a verdict. I lifted the lid, moved the cards, the corsage, the 2 coins my father used to carry for luck. The sterile bag lay where I'd left it, sealed and quiet. Inside, the square of gauze looked like any other, except it wasn't. Even before I turned off the overhead light, I could see the faint pearly sheen along its edge. I switched the kitchen to darkness. The gauze glowed, soft, deliberate, like a breath you can almost see on a cold morning. It didn't light the room. It warmed it. I held it up and felt that low hum in my skin again, the one that makes machines behave and fear forget its lines. Proof? Not in a lab sense, not something that would survive chain of custody or a skeptical committee. But to the one person who had stayed in the room and opened the door, it was enough. I placed the bag back in the cedar box and closed the lid with both hands, the way you end a prayer. Sleep found me like a tide that finally remembered the shore. When it arrived, it brought a dream. Sand that wasn't sand. A bowl of water. A thread of love that did not snap under weight. And a whisper, not from the past, but from the room I was learning to keep. Small doors, Evelyn. Tomorrow, another. The first dream arrived like a tide that knew my name. I was standing in the desert outside White Sands, the gypsum dunes glowing as if the moon had made 1,000 small fires. Wind erased my footprints as fast as I could make them. In the distance, a door stood where no building stood. No hinges, no frame. Just a door standing upright in open air. Its wood was worn smooth by hands I couldn't see. Behind it, nothing. Beyond it, everything. I woke with the taste of dust and peppermint on my tongue. My father's cough syrup from 1978, my mother's Sunday mints, memory shuffled the deck and dealt me both. The cedar box was still on my dresser. I didn't open it. Some mornings you say grace before you eat. This morning I said hush before I touched. The visions, if that's what they were, didn't announce themselves with thunder. They threaded through the ordinary. In the shower, the water sounded like a language I was just beginning to remember. At the grocery store, a child in line behind me dropped a carton of blueberries. They burst, a sudden June sky across the tile. I bent to help, and as I did, the hum, the one that had steadied machines and shaken me loose of fear, rose in my palms. The child stopped crying mid-breath. His mother's shoulders softened. We gathered the surviving berries and laughed like the spill had been the point all along. At night, the dreams returned. The door again, and the sense of near. Sometimes the room beyond felt like a chapel. Sometimes like a kitchen on a winter morning when the kettle begins to sing and you know whoever you love will walk in any second. Once I dreamt of a bowl of water on a wooden table, and 2 hands, mortal hands, lifting it to wash a stranger's feet. No face, no sermon. Just the sound water makes when it forgives. I wrote none of this down. Not because I didn't trust it, but because writing would have turned it into evidence when what it wanted to be was invitation. 3 days after the vanishing, I returned to the hospital as a volunteer. It was a stubborn choice, like planting tomatoes after a late frost. The day nurse raised her eyebrows. "You sure, Evelyn? We're overstaffed on paper and understaffed in the halls." "Perfect," I said. They assigned me to endoscopy recovery. Groggy patients, dry mouths, vital signs that swing like a porch door in a storm. There's a kind of holiness in waking people gently. The second patient of the morning, a woman my age with a winter pale face, couldn't find her breath. "Anxiety," the monitor said. "Fear," her eyes said. I sat beside her and offered my hand. "I'm here," I said, and I meant it in a bigger way than usual. The waveform steadied, and I realized I had matched my breathing to hers without thinking. The room changed temperature by a single degree, the degree kindness adds, and for a moment I felt that inward doorway open, the way a throat opens to sing. That afternoon, I drove to the edge of the missile range and parked at a turnout no one uses unless they're lost. The horizon lay flat as an altar. I didn't ask for a sign. I asked for courage to keep the door open when I looked foolish, ordinary, forgettable. Wind pressed its cool palm against my face. A hawk described a slow circle over nothing in particular, and then, this was real, not a dream. The hawk paused mid-flight, treading air, and I felt the interior voice that wasn't a voice say, simply, "Attention is prayer that doesn't need words." That night, I took the gauze from the cedar box. In the dark, its pearly edge breathed. I pressed the sealed bag to my chest, embarrassed by my own tenderness, and listened. The hum rose. In my mind, not my ears, the being's nearness returned, not like a broadcast, but like a memory arriving on time. "You kept the room," I felt more than heard. "I tried," I whispered. "You will be asked again for proof." "I have this," I said, glancing at the glow against my blouse. "Proof is for fear," the nearness answered, not unkindly. "Care is for love. Doors open to love." I thought of my folded faith, the drawer I opened for funerals. I thought of the unframed door in the dream, and how it didn't swing on hinges, it swung on will. "What happens if I fail?" I asked. "A warmth, like hands over a bowl to keep the heat from leaving. Then someone else opens, and you learn from the open door." The next days reduced themselves to practice. I practiced in line at the pharmacy when the clerk's scanner failed and the man behind me sighed like a tire losing air. I practiced in traffic when a stranger cut me off with a wave that apologized for nothing. I practiced with the custodian in the hospital who told me his mother had fallen and he couldn't afford to fly home. I gave him my lunch and the number of a charity I trust, and watched his face change from iron to human. The dreams continued to braid themselves with daylight. Once I woke to a phrase that didn't belong to me. When enough hearts keep the door, the room will be recognized. No date. No trumpet. Just a task spread so thin across so many small choices it became almost invisible, until, like starlight, you realized the dark was full of it. On the 7th night, I dreamt of the isolation room as it had been before the erasure, amber light, the soft tide of the waveform. But this time the bed was empty and I was not afraid. The door that wasn't in the hallway stood where the wall had been. I put my hand on the latch that wasn't a latch, and felt a certainty that didn't need me to name it. I woke with tears on my temples and salt on my lips. The cedar box was warm under my palm. Somewhere, a train sounded its lonely horn, and for once it didn't remind me of leaving. It sounded like arrival. I didn't know what Act 7 would ask of me. I knew only this. The room was following me now, or I was following it. Either way, the door was open. The first sign with both feet on the ground arrived in a place so ordinary I almost missed it, the DMV. I was there because my license had expired the week everything vanished. The waiting room smelled like old paper and aftershave. A television muttered the weather in a corner. 2 toddlers took turns losing and finding the same red crayon. No one looked like a prophet. No one looked like a witness. We looked like what we were, people with numbers in our hands, practicing patience with varying success. A woman at the counter began to cry. Not a scene, not drama, just a quiet leak her face couldn't fix. The clerk, a young man with a buzz cut and a rigid script, froze. I watched his eyes, the way they searched for a paragraph in the training manual titled, "What to Do When a Person Turns Human." There wasn't one. I felt the now familiar hum gather in the center of me, not as a miracle, just an instruction. Open the door. I stood, walked to the counter, and asked the woman, "Do you want to sit?" She nodded like the word itself had taken weight off her shoulders. I guided her to the row of chairs and sat beside her. "My husband," she whispered. "Surgery today. They called for the insurance card. I can't find it. Everything's a blur." The clerk hovered, awkward and kind. I looked up at him. "Take your time," I said, and something in my tone gave him permission to be a person. He did what the manual doesn't teach. He came around the counter, crouched, and said, "We'll figure it out." He called the hospital, got the ID on file, printed a temporary confirmation. The woman's breathing slowed. The tide inside me matched hers. When it steadied, the room felt 1 degree warmer. A small door had opened. We had walked through without noticing the hinge. I paid my fee and left with a license and a lesson. The signs were not fireworks. They were invitations accepted. 2 days later, I took the cedar box to my church. Not because I wanted a miracle examined, but because I needed a place that knows how to keep silence. The chapel was empty. I set the box on the last pew and let the light through the stained glass break itself over the wood. The gauze inside glowed softly even in daylight, like a shy candle. I didn't ask for interpretation. I just sat with it, the way you sit with a friend recovering from surgery, present, breathing, not fixing. An older man slipped in and knelt near the front, hands shaking as if he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. On his way out, he paused by my pew, not to pry, but to offer a nod that meant I see you keeping watch. When the door closed behind him, I realized I'd felt the hum thread between us for a second, a brief shared chord, 2 rooms acknowledging each other across the aisle. That night, I dreamt of the desert again, but this time the door wasn't alone. Doors dotted the dunes like small houses that belonged to no one and everyone. Some stood open, some quivered as if a hand on the other side hadn't yet found the courage to turn the latch. I woke with a sentence whole and steady in my mind. Recognition is not an arrival, it's a remembering. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid of being mocked, but because I was busy being taught. The hospital offered more lessons. In recovery, a teenager woke from anesthesia and panicked at the oxygen cannula, tearing at the tape with trembling fingers. His mother's face had that white, held breath I know too well. I slid my hand under his, palm to palm, a steady scaffold. "With me," I said, matching his breath, short, then longer still. He met my eyes. The waveform calmed. The mother's breath returned to her. She whispered, "Thank you," like a fragile, holy thing. The hum inside me was not mine. It belonged to the room we had all entered. On my lunch break, I walked past the neonatal unit. A nurse I trained years ago stood in the hallway, shoulders bent. "Rough day?" I asked. "Baby in 12C, she said. "Touch and go. I can't tell the parents anything certain." "Certainty is a desert," I said before thinking. "But attention is water." It wasn't poetry. It was the best language I had. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and went back in carrying nothing new, and everything changed. The signs widened. A neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door to ask if my porch light had flickered the night before. It had. We stood on my stoop as the sun sank, and for reasons that made sense only to the kind of math the heart understands, she told me about her divorce, her fear of sleeping alone, the way she started leaving the light on not to ward off burglars, but sorrow. I didn't prescribe or advise. I listened. The hum came, weeping soft. When she left, the bulb above us glowed steadier than it had all week. "Is this it?" I asked the room that follows me now. Is this what you meant by return? What came wasn't a timetable or a trumpet. It was a recollection. The carpenter's hands, the bowl, the table where no one was shamed, the thread that didn't break. A sentence rose like a tide returning to shore. When enough rooms open, he will be recognized, not because he arrives, but because we finally do. I don't have theology for that. I have practice. On Sunday, I visited the dunes. The wind tried to erase me and failed. I brought nothing but water and the gauze in its sealed bag. I didn't take it out. I held it the way you hold a baby's hat months after the child has outgrown it. Proof not for the court, but for the heart. A child ran past with a kite that kept collapsing. His father tried a dozen angles, then surrendered to laughter. The boy ran again, and this time the kite rose and held and strained against the string like joy. Everyone nearby cheered without planning to. I felt it then. The door, everywhere. Dozens of small, unannounced openings. A chorus without a conductor. I closed my eyes and said the only prayer I trust right now. I'm here. The wind answered in the oldest language on earth. And somewhere in the quiet beneath it, I heard what I think the being tried to tell me from the beginning. The return isn't a calendar event. It's a cathedral being built out of attention, one small, steady stone at a time. I didn't plan to speak. People like me, retired nurses who keep extra tissues in their purse and recipes on index cards, don't make declarations. We keep vigil, we keep records, we keep going. But silence, I've learned, can start to look a lot like consent to erasure. So I set up my old camcorder on a stack of cookbooks, pointed it at the chair by my kitchen window, and pressed record. My name is Evelyn Carter, I said, surprised at how steady it sounded. I'm 54. I was a nurse for 30 years. I'm going to tell you what happened, and I'm going to tell you how I changed. I didn't mention the base or the initials on the badges. I didn't offer dates or codes or the names of staff who still have to make rent. I told only what belonged to me. The smell of metal and storm, the waveform like a tide, the way a being with silver eyes taught an old nurse a new language, the one where attention changes the temperature of a room. I held up the cedar box, then set it down unopened. I have something that glows in the dark, I said, and even to my ears it sounded like a child's confession. It's proof for me. For you, all I have is this, the story of a door. I told them about the dreams, doors standing in the desert like invitations with no hinges. I told them about the hospital moments that didn't make sense unless you believed care has physics of its own. A teenager's breath finding its rhythm, a mother's shoulders lowering by imperceptible degrees, a clerk stepping out from behind his counter to kneel on the side of the problem where a human belongs. I told them about my folded faith, and the drawer I kept it in, and the day I stopped needing furniture to keep it safe. I did not say the word miracle. I said practice. The being never gave me a date, I said. It gave me a task. It said there's a room, and it appears whenever we choose attention over fear. It said recognition is the return, not thunder, remembrance. I spoke about the table, the one from the vision that felt like memory, a bowl of water, dust and afternoon light, laughter that belonged to the poor and the proud at once because love has no seating chart. I didn't try to explain it. I let the image do what images do. Work on the heart without asking permission from the head. Some people will ask for proof, I said. I used to be one of them. These days, I ask for rooms. I smiled then, a little at myself. And they keep showing up. At the DMV, on hospital floors, in kitchen doorways at dusk. I paused to breathe, and the house breathed with me, the old settling kind, wood remembering rain and sun. I thought of the agent in civilian clothes saying, "Forget," and how forgetting had never been one of my competencies. I am not here to persuade you, I said. I am here to witness. I kept something alive in a room that should not have existed, and it taught me that the room can exist anywhere if you keep it. I don't mean a place, I mean a willingness. I told them about the hawk, the flickering porch light, the child's spilled blueberries flashing like a tiny galaxy across linoleum. None of it is spectacular, I admitted. All of it is sufficient. Outside, a train blew its horn, the long, layered note that used to sound like a wound and now sounded like a call. I let it finish before I spoke again. If you want to do something with this story, I said, don't argue about it online. Open a door. In the smallest way you can stand. Take a breath with someone who can't find theirs. Narrate your kindness out loud, even if only the machines hear you. Set a table where shame has no chair. That's the work. That's the room. I reached for the cedar box and slid it a little closer. Not to prove, but to steady. I thought of the being's last lesson. The one that keeps arriving as quiet as a hand finding yours in the dark. Small doors open great rooms. My name is Evelyn, I repeated, because a testimony belongs to a person, not a rumor. I don't know where he is now. I don't know what name to give what I saw. I know only this. I laid my palm flat on the table as if blessing the wood. He said that when enough hearts keep the door, the room will be recognized, and the one we've been waiting for will not need to arrive because he will finally be seen. A breeze came through the window screen, carrying creosote and sun-warmed dust, the desert's own liturgy. I didn't cry. I was done with the crying part. I was ready to work. I reached forward and stopped the camera. The room remained. That night, before sleep, I opened the cedar box in the dark. The gauze glowed softly, like a promise spoken without words. I set it beside my bed, turned toward the door that wasn't in the hallway, and said the only prayer I trust now, the one that builds cathedrals out of attention. I'm here. In the silence that followed, I felt it. The familiar hum, the breath that isn't just mine, and understood with a certainty that didn't ask to be measured. The return is already moving through ordinary rooms. It's not marching. It's not shouting. It's opening. One small door at a time,